Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Green Philosophy. Today I'm going to share with you my condensed version of Chris Hedges, The Cost of Resistance. I'm bringing it down to the essential quotes since it's a long essay, and the purpose of my channel is to communicate to my viewers the nuts and bolts of effective activism as well as resistance to the status quo. If you leave with gaps in your understanding, I encourage you to go back and read the whole essay on his Substack. Hopefully my Cliff Notes version meets your needs. Friedrich Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, holds that only a few people have the fortitude to look in times of distress into what he calls the molten pit of human reality. Most studiously ignore the pit. Artists and philosophers, for Nietzsche, are consumed, however, by an insatiable curiosity, a quest for truth and a desire for meaning. They venture down into the bowels of the molten pit. Dying civilizations make war on independent intellectual inquiry, art, and culture for this reason. They do not want the masses to look into the pit. They condemn and vilify the quote-unquote burnt people, end quote, including Chris Hedges' friend Robert Hallam. They feed the human addiction for illusion, happiness, and the mania for hope. Revolutions and uprisings are spontaneous combustions. No one, including the revolutionaries, the burnt children, are able to predict them. Our duty is only at all times to speak out plainly without fear or trembling. That is, to hold clearly before the masses the tasks in the given historical moment, and to proclaim the political program of action and the slogans which result from the situation. The concern with whether and when the revolutionary mass movement takes place must be left confidently to history itself. Even though socialism may at first appear as a voice crying in the wilderness, it yet provides for itself a moral and political position, the fruits of which it later, when the hour of historical fulfillment strikes, garners with compound interest. While the moment of eruption is mysterious, it is the visionaries and utopian reformers, such as the abolitionists, who make possible real social change, never the practical politicians. It was the abolitionists, still viewed by some historians as irresponsible fanatics, who put forward the program, an immediate and uncompensated end to slavery, with black people becoming U.S. citizens, that came to pass, with Lincoln's eventual help, of course. The revolutions in Eastern Europe were led by a handful of dissidents who, until the fall of 1989, were marginal and dismissed by the state as inconsequential until it was too late. The state periodically sent state security to harass them. It often ignored them. I'm not even sure you could call these dissidents an opposition. They were profoundly isolated within their own societies. The state media denied them a voice. They had no legal status and were locked out of the political system. They were blacklisted. They struggled to make a living. But when the breaking point in Eastern Europe came, when the ruling communist ideology lost all credibility, there was no question in the minds of the public about whom they could trust. Those who accept risks, including long prison terms, penetrate the consciousness of the wider society, including the security organs that protect it. The ossified systems of governance, evidenced in the United States by the corporate-managed elections, our system of legalized bribery, our commercialized press, and our captive judiciary. Reform through these structures is impossible. As the system calcifies, it carries out ever more draconian repression. Schedule 7 is the king of Orwellian tools that defines the corporate state. It permits the police, along with customs officials, to stop any person at sea, land, or airport, port of entry, and interrogate them for up to 6 hours. The British government has used Schedule 7 powers to interrogate and obtain information from hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps more, since 2001. 419,000 people were subjected to Schedule 7 stops between 2009 and 2019. It will only get worse. University administrations in the U.S. spent the summer working in tandem with security consultants, many with ties to Israel, to determine the best ways to stifle protests this fall. There was a decade of popular uprisings from 2010 until the global pandemic in 2020. These uprisings shook the foundations of the global order. They denounced corporate domination, austerity, cuts and the failure to address the climate crisis, and demanded economic justice and civil rights. Then the backlash. The aspirations of the popular movements were crushed. State control and social inequality, rather than being curtailed, expanded. Many mass movements, because they failed to implement hierarchical, disciplined, and coherent organizational structures, were unable to defend themselves. Too often the protests resembled flash mobs, with people pouring into public spaces and creating a media spectacle, rather than engaging in a sustained, organized, and prolonged disruption of power. As Karl Marx understood, quote unquote, those who cannot represent themselves will be represented, end quote. Only highly organized movements that are structured around representation will save us. And all revolutionary movements need to be embedded in labor, otherwise any power vacuum that opens up will be filled by corporate elites, who of course are very well organized. Disciplined political organizations are not, in of themselves, sufficient, as Greece's left-wing Syriza government proved. If the leadership of an anti-establishment party is not willing to break free from the existing power structures, they will be co-opted or crushed when their demands are rejected by the reigning centers of power. Syriza eventually became an appendage of the international banking system. The Arab revolutions lacked the kind of radicalism in political and economic outlook that marked most other 20th century revolutions. The lack of hierarchical structures in recent mass movements, done to prevent a leadership cult and make sure all voices were heard, while noble in its aspirations, makes movements easy prey. Revolutions require skilled organizers, self-discipline, an alternative ideological vision, revolutionary art, and education. Revolution is not ultimately a political calculation. It is a moral one. It is grounded in a vision of another world, another way of being. It is driven, in the end, by a moral imperative, especially since many of those who begin a revolution do not survive to see its fulfillment. Revolutionaries know that, as Immanuel Kant wrote, if justice perishes, human life on earth has lost its meaning. I saw in the conflicts I covered the power of this faith, which lies outside any religious or philosophical creed. This faith is what Havel called in his essay, The Power of the Powerless, living in truth. Living in truth exposes the corruption, lies, and deceit of the state. It is a refusal to be a part of the charade. The long, long road of sacrifice and suffering that led to the collapse of the communist regime stretched back decades. Those who made change possible were those who discarded all notions of the practical. They did not try to reform the Communist Party. They did not try to work within the system. They did not attempt to work within the system. They didn't even know what, if anything, their tiny protests, ignored by the state-controlled media, would accomplish. But through it all, they held fast to moral imperatives. They did it because these values were right and just. They expected no reward for their virtue. Indeed, they got none. They were marginalized and persecuted. And yet these dissidents, poets, playwrights, actors, singers, and writers, finally triumphed over state and military power. They drew the good to the good. We may feel, in the face of ruthless corporate destruction of our nation, our culture, and our ecosystem, powerless and weak. But we are not. We have a power that terrifies the corporate state. And any act of rebellion, no matter how few people show up or how heavily it is censored, chips away at corporate power. Any act of rebellion keeps alive the embers for larger movements that follow us. It sustains another narrative. It will, as the state consumes itself, attract wider and wider numbers. Perhaps this will not happen in our lifetimes. But if we persist, we will keep this possibility alive. If we do not, it will die. Reinhold Niebuhr labeled this capacity to defy the forces of repression a sublime madness in the soul. Niebuhr wrote that if nothing but madness will do battle with malignant power and spiritual wickedness in high places. This sublime madness, as Niebuhr understood, is dangerous, but it is vital. Without it, truth is obscured. The prophets in the Hebrew Bible had this sublime madness. The words of the Hebrew prophets, as Abram Herschel wrote, were a scream in the night. When the world was at ease and asleep, the prophet feels the blast from heaven. This sublime madness is the essential. It is the acceptance that when you stand with the oppressed, you are treated with the oppressed. It is the acceptance that, although empirically all that we struggle to achieve during our lifetime may be worse, our struggle validates itself. As Hannah Arendt wrote in The Origins of Totalitarianism, the only morally reliable people are not those that say, this is wrong, or this should not be done, but those who say, I can't. There is a moment in Henry Kissinger's memoirs, do not buy the book, when Nixon and Kissinger are looking out at the tens of thousands of anti-war protesters who have surrounded the White House. The Nixon administration had placed empty city buses in ring around the White House to keep the protesters back. Henry, he said, they are going to break through the barricades and get us. And that is exactly where we want people in power to be. That is why, although he was not a liberal, Nixon was our last liberal president. He was scared of movements. And if we cannot make the elites scared of us, we will fail. We must build organized structures of open defiance. It may take years, but without a potent counterweight, without an alternative vision, and alternative structures of self-rule, we will be steadily disempowered. Every action we take, every word we utter, must make it clear that we refuse to participate in our own enslavement and destruction. Courage is contagious. Revolutions begin, as I saw in East Germany, with a few Lutheran clergy holding candles as they march through the streets of Leipzig in East Germany. It ends with 500,000 people protesting in East Berlin, the defection of the police and the army to the side of the protesters, and the collapse of the Stasi state. But revolutions only happen when a few dissidents decide they will no longer cooperate. We may not succeed, so be it. At those who come after us, as I speak as a father, will see we tried. The corporate forces that have us in their death grip will destroy our lives. They will destroy the lives of my children. They will destroy the lives of your children. They will destroy the ecosystem that makes life possible. We owe it to those who come after us not to be complicit in this evil. We owe it to them to refuse to be good Germans or good Americans. I do not, in the end, fight fascists because I will win. I fight fascists because they are fascists. This is a summary of Christopher Hedges, The Cost of Resistance. You can listen to the full speech on YouTube, or you can read his full essay on Sublime.